the virtual one of the old burying ground last year.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then you'll have a few surprises today. But so we're in Hillside Cemetery. By 1816, the old burying ground was nearly full. In 1818, the town bought adjoining plots of land here, owned by the Reverend David Palmer, who was the town's third minister, and Deacon Daniel Adams and Richard Warner, to form a quadrangular area for use as the new town cemetery, closer to what was now becoming the center of town, nearer the river and the mills. And there's a section here called Palmer Flats, because that Reverend Palmer gave that part of the land. The first burials were just behind the fence along Highland Street near the cemetery department offices in the common, and most of the burials were marked with slate stones, as in the old burying ground. When needed, additional land was purchased to add to the cemetery in 1856. Hillside Cemetery currently consists of 10 sections. There's a cremation section now, and over 8 acres, stretching from Bow Street to Meeting House Hill. Over 74% of the gravestones here have been photographed and added on Find a Grave, with over 4,242 listed on that site. The original map of the oldest part of the cemetery, which was drawn on a sturdy old window shade, still exists in the cemeteries and parks department offices. When rolled up for storage, it occupies very little space, yet is easily unrolled for viewing, making it a durable and practical example of Yankee ingenuity. And I'd like to start with a few quotes from the Massachusetts Book of the Dead. Chris, do you remember the woman who wrote that?
Not off the top.
No, I don't either. Exploring such old burial grounds gives us the opportunity to connect with and honor our history. Our goal in regards to those resting in peace here should be to keep their memories alive by telling their stories of both the famous and the not so famous, all of whose lives have been summarized in a few brief words on stone. And I'd like to start right over here, where this flag is, in the very corner. And this is the grave of Nahum Gardner Hazard. Sometimes it's spelled with 2 Z's, and sometimes it's spelled with 1. And he lived from 1830 to 1913. I will say that he was a black man, too. Nahum Hazard is due our recognition for serving in the Union Army during the Civil War. Beyond that, he was a free black man from Townsend who fought in the Civil War, but his remarkable story begins years before that. His family had originally emigrated from England to Providence Plantation, like Plymouth Plantation, in Rhode Island in 1778. He was born into a free black family in Shirley, Massachusetts in 1830. His father, Emerson Hazard, died 10 years later, and his mother, Kira, remarried Benjamin Hennessy. Kira and Benjamin are also buried in this cemetery, and several Hennessy's and other Hazards. Nahum had three siblings, Betsy Hazard Mitchell and James Horace Hazard, who are also buried in the cemetery, and Oliver Hazard, who is resting in the Evergreen Cemetery in Leominster. Nahum also had 5 Hennessy half-siblings who are buried here in Townsend. In 1863, his younger brother Oliver, born in 1836, mustered into the Union Army as a private from Townsend and served in the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. Oliver was wounded in action in 1864 and mustered out in 1865. There's a monument topped with a statue dedicated to Oliver in Carter Park in Leominster. And their brother James also served in the Civil War. I do have a picture of the monument in Leominster to his brother Oliver. I'm not sure why he gets the honor and Nahum gets this stone, because Nahum was also injured in the Civil War. And now back to Nahum's story. When he was 8 years old, 2 white men offered his mother an apprenticeship for Nahum in a tavern in western Massachusetts. She agreed, and the boy left with them. These men were, in fact, kidnappers who profited by seizing free blacks and took them into slavery and sold them into slavery in the South. Another black boy, Sidney Francis, was abducted in Lunenburg, and the boys were taken to Richmond, Virginia by way of Springfield, Mass., New York City, Philadelphia, Baltimore, etc., to be sold at a slave auction. But it was proven that they had been born free, and they were returned to their families in Massachusetts. Their captors were tried in Worcester, found guilty, and sentenced to 7 years in prison. Nahum became a farmer in Townsend. He married his wife Harriet, who was buried here in 1858, and they had 8 children. During the Civil War, Nahum served in the 55th, his brother was in the 54th, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment, Company 1. He received a shattering musket shot in his right shoulder while serving in South Carolina. Later, he became a granite wagon driver in Leominster. His wife and 3 of his children, who died very young, are also buried here. And although he moved to Leominster, his wife and children died first, so he's buried here with them. But he did farm and live in Townsend. A very detailed chronological count and map of the boys' abduction and rescue exists. And can be found on Find a Grave. And since this is the first stop, I'll quickly go over.
We have that history, don't we?
The abduction and rescue of Sidney Francis and Nahum Hazard. Everything, but September 2nd, 1839, Nahum Hazard was taken, and September 12th, Sidney Francis was taken. September 15th, having grown uneasy, Sidney Francis's father set out for Palmer, Mass. On foot to find his son. That same day, 3 of the kidnappers, on the day of the kidnapping, Dickinson Sharir is seen with Sidney Francis in Fredericksburg, Virginia. September 19th, a letter from Fredericksburg's mayor, Benjamin Clark, arrives in Worcester informing authorities of the whereabouts of the boys and asking for evidence to support their claims to be free people of color from here. Dickinson Sharir had been taken into custody. September 22nd, Worcester resident Levi Newton, nephew of the former Massachusetts Governor Levi Lincoln, observes in his diary, "Today I hear of an outrageous case of stealing of a Negro boy from this town." September 24th, George and Benjamin Rice of Worcester leave for Fredericksburg to bring back Dickinson Schreier as a prisoner to be prosecuted for kidnapping. A Lunenburg man who was in Virginia on business was asked to bring Nahum Hazard back. September 25th, a story on the kidnapping was printed in the Massachusetts Spy Notes. The circumstance has produced a strong sensation here, and much indignation is felt at the commission of so daring an outrage. September 26, George Bradbury of Boston travels to Lunenburg to investigate Nahum Hazard's abduction. He is the first to inform the boy's mother that her son has been found safe. He writes, "Joy enough, I assure you, was diffused through the bosom of the mother when I assured her that her son was safe and would soon be restored to her arms again." September 27th, the accomplice, Elias Turner, arrives in Palmer. October 2nd, Sidney Francis is returned to his parents in Worcester. It's not clear from the historical record when Nahum Hazard got home to Lunenburg, but he did. December 12th, a Virginia slave trader is charged in Nahum Hazard's abduction. Francis Wilkinson escapes from jail in Fredericksburg, and he is never tried or charged for the crime. January 28th, 1840, the trial of Dickinson Schreier and Elias Turner takes place in the Worcester Court of Common Process. The men are sentenced to serve 7 years in prison, although Mr. Turner's sentence is later reduced. Well, thank you for listening. It's kind of long. It's an interesting, amazing story that I had never heard before. And now we'll go back 2 rows back here. See the 2 flags.
Okay.
These are the Blood brothers. John Vernon Blood and his brother Abijah William, who was known as Will. You might have heard of John Vernon Blood. He was a Civil War veteran. He lived 1839 to 1839, and his younger brother Abijah 1843 to 1863. John Vernon Blood was a Civil War veteran who lived on Fitchburg Road in town. During the war, he had suffered a head injury which was said to have caused him to become eccentric and odd. He had 7 siblings, including his younger brother Abijah William, known as Will, who served in Company E of 33rd Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteers. Will died in Baltimore at the age of 20 of an illness with a high fever during the war. Now, earlier this week, I was here and there were no flags here, so I did ask the cemetery department to please have flags here for these brothers, since we're talking about them, and they were Civil War soldiers. People thought that John Vernon Blood lived in poverty in his later years, but when he died in 1931, he left $10,550.85 for a Civil War monument to be placed on the Townsend Common, and it is still there today, as we know. The bronze statue of a Civil War soldier was dedicated there on Memorial Day, 1832. The bandstand had to be moved from where the statue is now to accommodate the statue. The statue originally cost $5,500, with the rest of the $10,000 going into an account for its maintenance, and the town paid for the statue's pedestal and base. Recently, the statue was restored for the 150th anniversary of the Civil War with grant money from various state commissions, and the statue still exists. Contaminants and corrosion were removed from the porous metal, and the statue was high-pressure power washed, resealed, waxed, and restored to its former glory. Right, and now we're going to walk over to this tall monument over here. This will be the farthest one that we go to in this direction.